So, welcome everybody to this very wonderful speaker special event at the Writers Circle. As I said, I'm Judith Lindberg, and I am so excited to have Bonnie Friedman here today with us. Bonnie's original this is the new version. I looked in my attic, I know it's up there somewhere. I have the original copy of Writing Past Dark. I read it when I was at the very beginning of my writer's life, and it was so memorable and so encouraging and kind, and at a time when I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And so when I saw you on Christina Baker Klein's event that we held a few months ago, and I said, "Are you the Bonnie Friedman?" And you said, "What is that? I guess. I don't know." It turned out to be the Bonnie Friedman that I was thinking about. So I'm so excited to have this, and I have my new copy with the new preface. Um, Bonnie Friedman is the author of the best-selling Writing Past Dark, Envy, Fear, Distraction, and Other Dilemmas of the Writer's Life from HarperCollins, widely anthologized and now in its 28th printing. Writing Past Dark was recently named one of the 11 essential books on writing by the Center for Fiction, and one of the best books for writers by Poets and Writers, two organizations I highly recommend you know about if you don't already. Her essays have appeared in the Best Writing on Writing, the Best American Movie Writing, the Best Buddhist Writing, and the Best of O, the Oprah Magazine. And she is also the author of The Thief of Happiness, the story of an extraordinary psychotherapy, and her most recent book, Surrendering Oz, A Life in Essays. She teaches creative writing at University of North Texas and splits her time between Texas and Brooklyn. And with that, I will turn it over to Bonnie.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. This seems like such a wonderful community. And it's just this to me is the perfect size group, to talk about this kind of subject matter. And and thank you for all having your screens on, all of you who can do so there and do so, because it really helps me to see your faces. So what I thought I would do is I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I became interested in the subject, just introduce what we're going to be doing today. And then I thought it would be nice to go around and have you introduce yourself to me just very briefly. I'll tell you, your name, what you're working on, and then maybe something about what brought you here, so I know what people are thinking about. Then I have a presentation I'll do. We're going to do a little in-class writing, and then those who want to can share that, and then I'll make some concluding remarks. So I hope that sounds good. You can all hear me. My big Maine Coon cat is locked up in the bathroom. I kept thinking she's so huge. She would like topple me over if she came onto the call, as she sometimes does when I'm teaching. So I became interested in the emotional side of the writer's life very early on, because I noticed all of these vicissitudes of mine. Sometimes I would set aside a piece of writing and then many months later come back to it and be shocked that it was really worthwhile. And I would be reading along and I'll think, oh my God, why did I stop right there and turn the page? There's no more. And at the time I had this internal voice saying to me, this is lousy, this isn't working. When with a certain amount of distance, I could see, oh my gosh, it was working. Another reason why I wanted to write about this was that I noticed that I myself had many wasteful habits as a writer. For instance, I'll talk about this later, but I used to go into bookstores and always look for brand new books by young writers and induce states of envy in myself and feel just miserable. Walk up the street just feeling so dreadful. It took me a very long time to realize this was something I was doing to myself. I actually think that the situation with envy has gotten worse over the years. When I was younger, you'd open the newspaper and you might read a review that inspired that feeling, but you'd be done with it and you'd put the paper away and get on with your day. Now we are subject to these feelings of envy all day long because there's like there's incessant information coming at us, from Facebook, LitHub, as well as the newspapers, all these curated personae that I think it's very, very undermining. I know we probably all know that the more time you are on Facebook, studies show, the more depressed you become. Nevertheless, we're addicted to it. It's interesting, the things that addict us. But anyway, I started to understand that when I looked around the world, some of my friends who were writers were not as prone to undermining themselves as I was. And as a teacher, those of us who teach, I think we see this all the time, that those who feel good about their work, it's independent of how good the work actually is. I don't know if you've noticed that, but some of my most confident students are the ones that don't write very well. And the students who are the best writers are the most sensitive. They get shut down easily. That it's probably affiliated with their strengths as being a writer. But, I started to think, boy, I need to start thinking of my emotional self as needing caretaking and the way you would take care of a child, rather than just assume it's just going to happen by itself. One thing I've also noticed over the years is that the people who succeed are those who have drive, not just talent, drive and a certain amount of thick-skinnedness. So I've noticed certain friends who might have a blow to their ego, some of them very quickly start feeling good again. And others, it takes much longer. And that's wasteful. There's so much waste that goes on in the writer's life. So I'm very interested in ways that we can be less wasteful of our writing mojo, so we can get more writing done and more revision done and get work out into the world more. So later on, I want to talk about, what does rejection mean? How do most of us tend to globalize it rather than understanding the specific thing that communication might be saying to you. So there's a whole lot of subjects I would love to talk about today, but what I would really love to do is just go around and have everybody say their name, what you're working on now, and what interested you in this workshop, so that I can make sure I address it, if that's okay. Judith, should I call on people just, going around?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I've got you on speaker view, but if you have everyone just point and request, that's how I usually do it.
Well, that's what, Mally, you're the first person on my screen. If you tell me what you're working on, and if I'm saying your name right, and what brings you here today. Like, what inspired you in the subject matter? Oh, you're on mute.
Mute. Okay, there I am. 1 second here. Shameless plug. I was lucky enough to have my debut novel picked up by a publisher. I had written it through the Writers Circle. And this was a labor of love that took 5 years on and off. I was working full time, and the publisher said, how about a 3-book contract? So I went from 5 years for book 1 to 1 year for book 2. And book 2 almost blew the top of my head off. I didn't know how to do it, and I didn't like it, and it wasn't fun anymore. It was work. So I'm trying to figure out how to regain my balance and enjoy writing while having real world deadlines.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. The next one on my screen is Lola, if you'd unmute.
Yeah, so my name is Lola. I'm working on a book in Christian theology, and I've written 3 books in the past, a couple on people in the music industry and one on sustainable design. But this book is much more complicated and lengthy than those. And I've been working on it for quite a few years, gradually developing the ideas. And I'm on this call because of the word endurance in the title of the call. I just really, worry about getting to the end of it and need to know how to keep that endurance going.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen. I'm a relatively new writer. I actually started in Christina Katz's class, Where Do I Begin, several years ago, and progressed to working on a novel through classes at the Writer Circle to help keep me accountable and keep me consistent, which I have a huge struggle with. And in fact, like life situations happen where I ended up having to not take a class during last fall, and it just all fell apart. I just didn't write at all, quite frankly. And now I'm getting back into it, and trying to find that consistency again to be able to complete the work, because I love it when I'm doing it. And so that's what sort of draw me to this workshop.
Thank you. Thank you. This is so helpful. Thank you. I really appreciate this. Ellen, you're the next on my screen.
Hi, Bonnie, I'm a huge fan of your book. I read it many years ago, probably when it first came out. And I was also struck by how supportive and kind and perceptive it was. So thank you. So where I am is I'm in the middle of writing an adult novel that was a young adult novel. And it's, I'm pretty disciplined. I mean, I do work on it every day. But it's starting to feel a little bit to me like I'm doing it almost at a certain expense to myself, because I'm also working, I'm a freelance editor and writer, and I'm kind of approaching a kind of a burnout with it. And I think too, what's going on is that there's material I'm writing about that's touching on some stuff that's hard, emotionally hard for me. And I want to be able to access those places in myself. But, I feel kind of protective of myself at the same time. So I'd say that's where I'm at.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. I'll bear that in mind. Thank you. Andy, you're next on my screen.
Hi. So I started writing a couple years ago, probably right before the pandemic. I went from like a super crazy executive job to suddenly not having one. And I will say, ever since I started writing, I've basically done it every day. I feel like from the endurance standpoint, it's great. I love it. An idea for a long series poured out of me. I quickly wrote 3 full manuscripts. I feel good about it. And then the thought of sending it out into the world and sending it to publishers and rejection and everything paralyzes me. And I'm like, how do I get over that obvious next step and just build up the emotional endurance? I think that's what this appealed to me. I'm like, oh yeah, you gotta get some tough skin when you kick your baby into the deep end. But that's what I really need some tools for.
Good. Okay. Thank you. I'm so appreciating people's comments. Very helpful to me. Jane, what you talk to us if you would unmute. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Jane. I've written 2 novels that are sitting gathering dust on my shelf. I hate rejection. I don't deal well with it. And then one day at dinner, my husband told me that he'd finished my book 2 weeks prior and hadn't told me that he'd finished it. And I'm still not over that. That was in October. So, it's, and I've had 7 or 8 rejections from agents. And it's stopped me from doing any more writing. And I know that you shouldn't do that, right?
That's right.
But I just don't see the point anymore. But I know I should be, because that's kind of what I like doing.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Amy, you'd unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So my name is Amy Saunders, and I'm working on researching a historical fiction novel. I was a history teacher for many years, and I have 4 children, 17 through 5. And so my husband's also a physician, so I put him through med school. So I've spent a lot of my life kind of doing things for other people. And I was also for a long time in very conservative environments that had very strict ideas about gender roles and things like that. We have since exited those environments. And so I feel like I'm a little late to the party. So I think the biggest thing for me is I've wanted to write my whole life. I've dabbled in it. I've done some articles for organizations that I've volunteered for and things like that. But I've always wanted to write fiction, especially historical fiction, because I loved it. But I deal with a lot of imposter syndrome because of the way that I've had to put my time into other things for so many years. And now I feel like I'm just kind of starting in my 40s. And I know that you can write at any time, but that's the emotional thing that like when I sit down to write, there's a lot of messages that say like it's too late for you kind of thing. And so that's kind of why I wanted to be here.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so appreciating what people are saying. Thank you. Christina, you're next for me.
Hello. Hi. I'm Christina. I go by Chris. Kristen, it's so good to see you again. I teach short story writing and on and off, where do I begin? At the Writer's Circle. I have published tons of short stories. It's short. I consider myself a short story writer. I have a very thick skin when it comes to submitting short stories. I never get to submitting 100 a year, although it's always kind of a goal. They say, it's a numbers game. You got to get them out there. And I'm familiar with that. I understand that. And I'm fine with that. But I'm writing a novel. I think 83,000 words into the novel. So I'm coming to the end, and my connection is unstable. I'm sorry about this. I'm coming to the end, and I notice I'm slowing down. Like I'm kind of, there's a lot of anxiety about finishing it. I don't know what to do with a novel. Like I don't feel like I'm doing it right. I don't feel like I know how to manage that. I'm aware that I have tons of revision. I'm a complete pantser, so I've been making it up as I go along, which is fine because I'm a short story writer, so I'm accustomed to that. But with a novel, it's so big, I don't really know how to handle it. So that kind of endurance is sort of interesting to me, how to just kind of keep pushing on, get to the end of that first draft, and then, figure out how to manage going forward. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Helene, you're next on my screen. You're still muted. I don't know if Helene is there. Maybe okay. Not. She just left. Oh, you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm sorry. I've had technology issues the entire weekend. So I appreciate people resending me the link at the Writer's Circle. I've been writing for 30 or 40 years, but as a business writer, really primarily a communications person. So I've ghostwritten business books, op-ed speeches, mostly on economic development, financial, broad-based business issues. So now it's sort of my time for me, and I've been trying to work on a few other projects. One is sort of a series of leadership vignettes focused on women that I wanted to tie together into a book of some kind. And the second is a more memoir-oriented piece about my niece and her growing up in our lifetime. She's different from the rest of our family, and I won't get into all the details now. And how eye-opening that has been for me. So, but I've been struggling. I'm very good at the projects where someone needs help on something, even if I volunteer to help them with blogs and different things, but I never do get to finish starting past the first, 20 pages of what it is I want to really write and finish, because I just have struggled with finding the time. So I found I discovered your book. I started reading it, and then I got a note from the Writer's Circle that you were a speaker today. And I said, perfect. This is my time for me to get going and moving. So that's my story.
Thank you. This is very helpful to me. Thanks, Celine. Thank you. Elizabeth.
Hi. I began writing formally in the pandemic. I have large swaths of a memoir already written, basically to get it down while my memory was still very clear. My parents' minds were still very clear because they're a big part of that story and they're quite old. So I kind of did it in reverse in that I really just wanted to get the story down. And the pandemic offered me an opportunity to take writing classes. So I took about 100 hours of writing classes remotely last year, all different kinds, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, just to kind of dabble a little bit in it. I'm a lifelong avid fiction reader, but I lean strongly towards personal essay. It just comes out of me. I don't have to work at it in the same way. And the reason I'm here today is because I have never read anything more beautiful than Surrendering Oz. It was transformative for me. I didn't read it until the fall after I'd taken, it was like 60 hours of writing classes. And I read it and I thought, I get this woman gets me.
That's thrilling. We have to talk. That's amazing because that book came out with a small press and I felt like they didn't do very much, if anything, to get it out into the world. So I'm glad you found it. I'll search.
I'm glad I found it too. Thank you.
Thank you. When you said that you were a natural essayist, I was thinking that's how my mind tends to work. We'll have to connect. Thank you, because I'm amazed you found that book because I felt like it was very obscure. Thank you. Lee, you're next on the screen.
Oh, hi. So I'm Lee and I write long form fiction, speculative fiction. I have written 2 novels. One I never let leave. It was asked for and I was never good enough. And then the second I did query extensively, had fulls out, went through that whole process of waiting a year for someone to read a full. It was very, it was just a distressing kind of experience. And so I'm beginning something new, and I'm realizing that my last book, I'm not interested in continuing to try to query it because it's not my best work. I'm doing my best work now, but I'm having to think in my mind about different ways of thinking about success. Like, I'm not sure traditional publishing is going to be the thing for me. And I have to, I think, maybe contemplate learning about self-publishing or even starting a small publishing company at the same time as working on this book, which I think is going to be a series. So I'm just open to anything that helps me sort of have less of a bad feeling about the concept of actually publishing. I want that to be a positive thing. And it's a difficult time to be querying. There's no doubt. So, and it's only because there's so many amazing people writing, which is a fabulous thing. But I have to find another way to look at it.
Yes, it is a very difficult time. You're right. The people have been saying that for 20 years, but it really has now. So I think it's true. Yes, completely. Lida. I don't know if she's Lida. Maybe we'll come back to her. Rebecca, you haven't spoken yet, so tell us about what you're working on and how you came to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca. I write primarily historical and fantasy work and a lot of crossover between the two, long form and short stories. I'm in college at the moment, so that is a challenging factor in my writing schedule. I've written 2 full novel manuscripts in the past 3 years, and I'm working on one now. I think my challenge is keeping the inner critic and editor inside for the whole first draft. I tend to reach like 40,000 words and then start editing or mentally critiquing the work when it's just important to get it down on paper. And also, I really feel what a lot of people were saying about how the querying publishing process is very intimidating to look at, you know, and get started on.
Yeah, thank you. I see Lita has, oh, the computer has neither, oh, I'm so sorry, but at least you're listening and I'm glad you're there. So I'm aware that you're there, Lita, even though you couldn't talk to us.
Actually, Lita, if you want to put what's going on with you in the chat, at least we can have that. That would be useful.
Oh, so yeah, I could come back to that. So you know what, when I think about, this was so useful for me because often when I speak about this subject, I talk a lot about rejection, and I will talk about that, you know, how to understand it, how to deal with it. But it's really interesting to me that so many of the writers here today are interested in the concept of endurance and staying with a long project over the life of it, and even and then, you know, trying to see it out into the world. You know, one of the things that I think about with, I'll just say that what I'm going to talk about today is I'm not going to be talking about a lot of the stuff that you can find easily on blogs or articles about, although that is important information about, I think somebody was referencing the idea to submit 100 times during the year. Just tremendous amount of submitting, much more than I've ever done. I did an event with Therese Svoboda, who's very well published, and she says she submits 50 times a year. She has some, you know, she's submitting something, and she gets about 5 acceptances. So that was very interesting for me, because if you don't know how often people are submitting and all you get are their successes and acceptances, one tends to compare oneself and think, oh my God, there are all these incredibly successful people. They're getting published, they're doing so well. And you're not hearing about, you know, all of the rejections that they're getting. I was asked recently to talk about a rejection that I had, and what came to mind was an essay that I'd written that was rejected by many small presses and then was picked up by a much larger, more prestigious one, and went on to win a notable Best American Essays and special mention in the Pushcart Prize anthology. And the only reason I mention that is that's a very typical experience. You know, it's so happens so frequently that a piece is turned down by one place and accepted by someplace better. Every writer I know has a story like that. Often it's their breakthrough piece. So, you know, what that says, one aspect of rejection, of course, is just that it hasn't found the right home. I had another example like that of a piece of mine that I submitted to the Writers Chronicle, and they turned it down, and I felt terrible, so terrible that I just threw it in the trash. And I was going off to teach at NYU, and I thought, why would anybody want to learn anything from me? You know, this is, you know, and the same piece was published later in Image Journal, and was also listed as a notable. The same piece that I'd thrown in the trash. So it's a good thing I sent it out again. And the home that it found was a much better fit. So it really is true what people say, that part of rejection has to do with that your piece hasn't found the right reader for it, the right editor to whom it speaks. I heard a major editor of a journal in New England say that he realized that the pieces that he accepted for his journal were answering some question that he had in his life. And that was very, very useful for me to hear, because now I understood why it was very unlikely that he was going to run the essay that I wrote about why girls in the Bronx that I grew up with didn't have children. That was not answering any question that he had in his life, although it might be answering a question a different editor had in his or her life. So, you know, that contextualizing, I think, is very, very good, because I think we tend to globalize, and we tend to think that the rejection, if we receive a rejection, we tend to think, oh, this is about my value as a writer. It's so hard not to think that way and be extremely discouraged by it. When I think about the experience that I have when I'm taking a rejected manuscript out of the mailbox or it's returned by submittable, and how I just feel like, oh my God, I can't write. And you know what I realize also is that whenever I do have a success, I always assume I will never be rejected again. Whereas the truth of the matter is all writers I know at every stage, I know somebody has a big book coming out in the summer and she was just turned down for a small grant and it really hurt her. And I was like incredulous, you know, and so one of the things that I think about, you know, I'm going to basically try to talk about the things that you can't hear about so much in the articles and blogs online, because there's a lot of stuff about how important it is to just keep submitting your work. So I'm going to try to supplement that with other things that are not as addressed. But one of the things that I think about is that on the one hand, we're in touch with something of enduring value, the inner world of significance, of making art, of trying to see what does life mean. And it's worth all the pains that we put into it, because whatever kind of writing we're doing, we're trying to catch in the web of the work significant things that defy ordinary conversation. If we could say these things, we wouldn't have to write them. So that's the drive, and that's the deep pleasure of writing. And it is also, for me, I don't find writing fun. I know a few people that do, they enjoy it, it's their happiest. I don't. But I'd have to say it is the most meaningful thing I do. And it is the only meaningful thing I do. I mean, without it, my life just starts feeling crappy. So it's almost as if I'm being blackmailed by writing, like I must do it. It is holding me hostage. I have to write. And when I don't write because I'm feeling crappy because of rejection, that's suffering. So, you know, on the one hand, our work puts us in touch with something of sacred importance. And on the other hand, we live in a world of yes, no, rejection, acceptance, good publication, bad publication, yes money, no money, you know, which is these dyads that it's reality, but we have to find some way to stay in touch with the inner world of significance, which has nothing to do with this other thing, this other thing of judgment. It's sort of like a parent can't judge their child is beautiful. Both of every cat I've ever had is infinitely beautiful. If somebody came over to my house and didn't like the looks of my cat, didn't see what was charming about my cat, it would be so easy to dismiss that. I could see what's fantastic about each of I could see I don't need anybody to praise them. And so there's some way that I think as writers, we need to think about, I don't have all the answers, but at least some of the questions of like, how do you create a practice for yourself of being able to stay in touch with what is of infinite value in your world of inner significance, even as you're subjecting it to, because you want it to get out into the world. And it's a world of dyads, it's a world of dichotomies, it's a world of yes and no, it's a world of acceptance, rejection. That's one thing that I think about. Another thing that I really think a lot about, for me, part of the answer is I have a big on-off switch. And when my switch is on, I feel fantastic. I feel fabulous. Ideas come to me. I wake up early. I have energy. I can take risks in my writing. And when my switch is turned to off, I feel dreadful. I think my ideas are stupid. It's hard for me to write. I compare myself. When my switch is turned to off, I'm at my most envious. It's when I'm most inclined to compare myself to other people. So I've noticed this. It's a very strange thing. If I start feeling envious about one person, I start wanting to read a lot of stuff about other people, thinking, well, maybe I'll find some failure of theirs, or I'll see some way that they're not successful. But often, actually, what happens is they're doing quite well, and I feel even more envious. So one thing that I think about, and that I want to have you think about, is what can you do to get your on off switch switched back on? So I'll tell you some of the things that I do that help me. Of course, I do exercise actually really helps me. Waking up super early. So that's a great thing. It's almost like, it's just very good. It gives me a sense of capability and upbeatness that's physiological. I have a little writing notebook and I wake up early in the morning, and I always tell myself I'm not going to be doing any real writing yet. So I read, novels or memoirs or some Buddhism. And then I find myself writing, ideas start coming to me in the margins of other people's work. And then I start writing it down into my own journal. And for me, the thing that most switches my on off switch to on is getting new ideas, getting new ideas. Then I feel that puts me back in touch with that world of infinite value, the world of inner meaning, the world of creativity. Other things that I do, I share work with others, and then getting their feedback helps me to plug back into it. Although I've noticed, and I try to notice which of the people that I share with give me that positive feeling. Because of course, we all of us who have shared our work know that you could share your work with somebody extremely intelligent, but that isn't really useful in this particular way. And this way is very important. So, I try to notice and call out the people. There's certain people I do not share with. They're very, very smart, but they're not helpful for me in this way. They don't take me deeper in. I think just noticing what gets your on off switch back to on quickly is useful. Another thing that gets my on off switch back to on is submitting that work right away. For me, that works. So a piece comes back, I try to find other homes for it that are apt and get it out into the world. This woman, Therese Svoboda, that I, gave a presentation with, what she does is she rewrites the piece, believe it or not. And she says that way she feels as if she's gotten something useful out of this experience, which to me feels so bad, of rejection. She turns it around. She's like, okay, that's a signal that I'm supposed to work on it again. And she does work on it again. She said this, and she's very well published. That would drive me crazy, but she revises things, and that gives her the same feeling that I'm talking about. Before I go any further, let me just ask, are there any questions that come up around what I'm saying? Because I realize it's fun if we have back and forth. And so just wanted to take a moment and see, is this inspiring? Does this give you ideas? Are there things that I would love to hear if anybody has a thing that they do now that they're thinking about it that gets their on off switch back on once it's been turned off. You could raise your, oh yeah, Rebecca, if you'd unmute.
Yeah, I know that a lot of times when I'm really busy, especially with work and coursework now, then my creativity seems like it gets pushed aside. And sometimes I just need like a day or two where there's nothing going on in my brain. And then all of a sudden the creative ideas start coming again. And sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes if I have a weekend off, I'm like, I should spend it writing. But if I force myself to start producing without the rest, then it just doesn't come out or come at all.
That is such a good point. I've noticed that too. And it's frustrating those days where you can't work and you're just sort of lying fallow. Oh yeah, Mally.
I write bad poetry because I write fiction. So if things are just not going well and I can't make myself get back to the page, I write something else where I don't put the pressure on myself. And it's fun. And I don't care if it's good or bad. And it brings me back.
That's such an interesting point that you make. Two things. One is Therese, who we were speaking about. She says she switches genres when she's feeling defeated in one genre, and she writes many different kinds of things. but also taking the pressure off, because that chimes with what I was saying about waking up very early and writing in the margins of other people's stuff, and then at some point finding that I'm writing in my own notebook. I'm wondering if anybody else has a thing that they have noticed turns themselves back on. Elizabeth.
I've noticed that what helps me is to get out of my own life and work with a self-compassion process that is about breathing and thinking for others. So with so much going on in the world, there's a lot to think about in hoping for goodness for others. So if I get out of my own way and think about who in my life or who I know needs assistance or help, I find I come back to the page refreshed.
Oh, that's so interesting, really marvelous. That's probably true of me too, and I've never noticed it. That's because I used to help take care of my mother, and it was so good not to think about myself. And then I would have a good feeling separate from anything that happened on the page or in my mind. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Christina, you had your hand up?
It's sort of along the same lines as everybody else. I'm a huge journaler, and what I love about journaling is that nothing I ever write in my journal will ever be published. It's never something I'm working on for some other purpose. It's simply to put words on the page and to simply just kind of write in that way and say, this is just, somebody a long time ago said there's no such thing as writer's block because you always have language in your head. There's only anxiety about taking the language out of your head and putting it on the page. And that really resonated with me like a long time ago. And so sometimes I don't have time to write. I don't have the emotional investment to write. I'll just take out the journal and say, I'm just going to put the words that are in my head on the page. And that's it. It's not for publication. It's for nothing, just to make my fingers move and engage with writing. And that really tends to move into a better space. And that leads to something else.
Oh, that is really useful. That is very, I really resonate with that too. And I'm just noticing this theme of ways that we find to tell ourselves to take the pressure off. I used to have the old days, there used to be these records. And if you had a bad record, you'd put pennies on the arm of the record to hold it, to weight it a little more, and it wrote around better. And if you put too much weight on, the thing stopped. And I feel like that's when we put too much pressure on our writing, that's part of the problem. It's very, very interesting. I'm just curious, is there anything else that people have noticed that helps get their on-off switch back on? What would you say, Judith? I'm going to call on you.
Well, I do everything. I'm very, very, very disciplined because I was a dancer. And every day I go to the bar, which in this part of my life is go to the page. And I'm actually listening to everybody's suggestions and I'm like, oh, you're so much kinder to yourselves than I am, because I just push myself to go back to the page. And some days I feel the anxiety and frustration, but when I'm in the page, I settle into the work of it and I stop critiquing. I'm really just focusing on trying to write. But to me, I really treat it like the bar every morning. You just go to the bar. It doesn't matter if you're sprained ankles or you've got a hip injury, you go to the bar. And that's how I've always dealt with my writing. I don't know if that's good or bad.
No, that's very useful for people to hear. I mean, that seems really ideal, actually, because most of us have things that get us where, when I think about why it's hard for me to do that, I start thinking, oh, if my low feeling self goes to the page, I'll ruin what I have there because I'm stupid today or something, or I'm a little sleepy today, or I haven't had enough coffee today, or I had a rejection yesterday, so therefore I can't do it. And it's much better to say, no matter what, this is my practice. And I'm just, just the way, somebody doing, Zen meditation will sit every day. with whatever self they have to bear. That it is, it is, I think one of the challenging parts is when you think, oh, I don't want to ruin this object that I'm working on, this thing that I've been developing. So how can I take this flawed self and go back to this, this manuscript I'm working on?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of save as. I say this in all my classes. When I'm in a bad mood and I know I'm about to ruin it, I save as. And then I do whatever I do. And almost always when I'm in that bad state and I go back to look at the earlier version, I've actually made progress, even though I'm not happy with it yet. The original version is not as, it's not better. I've made progress even through the muck of whatever emotional or mental state I'm in. And it moves the work forward. Like I said, every day you just go back and you keep working and you just, I'm not kind to myself, but I push through and it makes the work grow.
Yeah, that's very useful for those of us who can take some of that dancerly discipline. When I think about dancers, I think they work through the pain. There's a that is almost wrapped up in the act of dancing, I think, is a certain amount of pain. Were you a ballet dancer?
I wanted to be a ballet dancer, and then I eventually realized I had to move into a different style of dance. So I did mostly theater dance and modern dance in my youth. So yeah, but definitely was a ballet dancer in every way other than how I made money.
Let me just ask, is there anything else people on this? I'm just so curious. Is there anything else people? Oh, yes, Ellen.
Yeah, so this is kind of inspired by what you said, Judith, that for me, I'm like the slow writer, but I write my first drafts longhand. And I find that it's kind of essential for me to do that because I feel connected to it in a different way than if I'm looking at a screen. And similar to what you said, what Judith just said, I get up every morning. I kind of treat it as a job at 5:30 because I have to kind of do my writing work before any freelance work I have. And that time is my time and it's sacred and nobody gets in the way of it. Even my dog doesn't get in the way of it. And I just write for 2 hours longhand because I'm in it. And this is the first draft, after that it goes into a computer. But there's something about the combination for me, I guess, of treating it as a job where I do it every morning religiously that takes some of this sense of, is it good or bad? It kind of removes that question for me because it's no longer good or bad. I mean, and I'm not saying those voices always creep in, oh, this stinks or whatever, or this is great, but it's just something I do. And every day, every weekday, not on the weekends. But I made it into a job and it's, it's helped a lot. The longhand may not be for everybody, but for me, it's the way I stay connected, so.
Right, I've noticed that when I write longhand, for me, there's a greater concision to it. It has a different quality than when I mostly write on the computer and then I will transfer things over, but I feel like I'm linked to it in a different way. That's very interesting that this takes it out of the realm of, is it good or is it bad? That it's just your discipline and it's what you're going to show up and what you're going to do. Whatever. I don't know that would work for me, but I love that for those who can make that, the voices in my head are so loud that I tend to work every day anyway, but it might take me much longer to get there, to get the thing that I'm working on. What I find after I've been away from a piece of writing and return to it, I find that, I think, somebody had sent in a question about a novel that she's working on and trying to fit, keep the flame going even while she has to fit it in with the rest of her life. I don't know how others are with this, but what I find is it takes me a few days to get back into the rhythm of a deep project. So I've been, I finished a novel. I'm working on another nonfiction book. And I think of it almost as entering a trance state. And it takes a while to get into that trance. So I have to read over the pages, start making notes in them, start doing revision. I think different writers have different tricks for doing this. I know Joan Didion said that she would rewrite her, she couldn't possibly have been truthful about this, but she said she would rewrite all of the pages. She would type up into every single day, all of her old pages until she got to the new material. Then she'd be writing new pages. That can't be true because she just spent all of her day typing in all of her old pages. But the point I think I got from that was that even for her, there's a lot of like getting back into the rhythm of it. And I think at that point, it's nice to be kind to yourself. I tell myself that it's like this muck that you have to get through until you're back in tune with the piece. And so it's important. What I tell myself is that this is the hero's work that the non-professional writer can't do. And it's sort of like yucky. It's like the taste in your mouth when you're having your teeth cleaned, and you just have to put up with it because you want to have good teeth. Similarly, to put up with all the negative voices that are saying this is no good because you're not yet. It's like when you're writing a piece, for me, when I'm writing a piece, I'm in an I-thou relationship with it. I can't see the shape of it. I'm not making judgments about it. I'm communing with it. Whether it's an essay or a chapter, the shape of a novel. But then I leave at the end of a writing session, and the next day I sit down and it's as if a crust has formed over it. And I have to get through that crust in order to get back into the fresh new writing. And I think it's very helpful to just know that. That's the situation for most writers. That's why Hemingway would leave off in the middle of a sentence. That wouldn't work for me. I need to do this whole trance state thing and have the, certain habits. A lot of writers, I think that's why a lot of writers are creatures of habit. I know Isabel Allende said she begins every book of hers on the same day of the year, the day that she began the House of Spirits. So if there's a lot of the year left over, she will do other things, and she'll have her opening sentence ready on the right day of the year, and then she'll sit down that day. But when you think about like, why are so many writers superstitious? I think it's because we know how it feels when it's going well, and we have to find various ways to get back into that, what I think of as almost a trance state, even though of course I'm very lucid during it. What I'm thinking would be nice to do is for us to do a little writing together. I have be fun to do, just a 10-minute free write, and I will give you a prompt. And then those who want to share, I have two different prompts, and I'm trying to decide between the two of them. I think this one is more fun. So I'm going to ask you to describe for us someone who taught you who you were in a good way. Someone who taught you who you were in a good way. So it could be a friend, a neighbor, a teacher, a student, a parent, a lover, who put you in touch with your own possibilities. And I would love you to let us meet this person and let us understand what this person said to you. So, you could show us this person, let us hear this person. And, with these free writes, it's just like whatever comes up in 10 minutes, it's just, for some people, it's just going to be a grab bag, just give yourself permission to just, you never know what the end of the sentence is going to be in this kind of a thing. So, what I was thinking is I will time 9 minutes, and then I'll let you know when there's 1 minute left. And then those who feel that they wouldn't mind sharing would be a gift to us to get to hear these, and then we could have a conversation about this. Are there any questions about the writing prompt? Okay, so I'm just gonna set my fun timer here. So someone who taught you who you were in a good way. Any questions? Just whoever came to mind. There might be a whole bunch of people. It doesn't need to be the best person. It could be any person. Whoever flashes into your mind, and I'll let you know when 9 minutes are up. So there's one more minute. Keep going. I'll tell you when time is up. Keep going. Okay, so that's time. So just, finish up that sentence or that idea. And then when you're done, make sure you come back so we can see you on screen if you can. So it would be really nice to hear some of these. And what I love to do with listening to a free write is I'm not used to doing it so much on screen, but just to say bravo and listen to each one everybody who would be generous enough to share with us, because I think we'll learn from this. And we're not going to critique anything. We're just going to appreciate this is what happened to get written in these 10 minutes. This is what flashed through this writer's mind in a succession of thoughts or words or sentences. And then when we're done, we could talk about what it made us think of. We could talk about them as a group rather than any particular one. So it's just in the spirit of sharing. I'm just wondering, I would love to hear whoever would care to read theirs. I'd be very curious to hear about somebody in your life who taught you about yourself in a positive way. I think we would all love to hear it. Is there anybody who would be brave and read to us? Oh, you will lead? Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you.
Sure, I'll be brave.
Great.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. She's not beautiful. Too many dead limbs towards the ground and mounds that cover past seasons, past decades, fallen limbs, almost like a pox upon her. But the way her roots wrap around the rock that shelters the spring that feeds her lets me know that she is safe, that this is a place that is safe, a safe place to be myself. And yet the mother tree is not comforting. The energy that passes into my fingers when I touch her scarred bark is not personal. She does not know me, but the powerful pulses that she passes to me challenge me to know myself. I know from reading the overstory, The Life of Trees, that even though she is not ancient nor young, she is likely the mother of this forest where I am honored to live. And she tries every day that I let her to tell me through the loamy earth on my bare feet, so what if the canopy is full, branches overlapping all around you? Reach. There is a dapple of sunlight just for you. Thank you.
Bravo. Thank you. That's what we do. We'll do this. We'll just applaud one another and hope somebody else will read after Lee. Is there somebody else who would be brave and read to us? Just whatever you happen to have written. Oh, yes. Thank you, Rebecca.
I started writing the story of one of my best friends and I didn't get all the way through it. So I don't know if we get to the positive influence yet, but it's a free write. Get as far as you can. He and I met in early high school. We were both obnoxious. That was a given at our age. We were also the same kind of obnoxious, pretentious, off to one side, too vocal in class and too quiet everywhere else. Two people that much alike can only love or hate each other. I decided to do both. 2 cycles of summer camp passed, largely not noticing he existed. In fact, he was one of a crowd of boys with the same first name. I ranked them in order of favorites. He was not the first, but he was the one who stayed year after year until we were thrown together on the sports field, not my natural habitat. God grant me the confidence I had at 15 that made me think that this varsity athlete and I could be evenly matched. But what I lacked in coordination, I made up for in the sheer audacity of my insults to him. It started early in the mornings and simmered over lunch. Are you ready to lose? I don't have to. I won't. Keep telling yourself that. You know, what all solid and mature relationships are made of. It was always realer to me than it was to him. Of course it was. He won 80% of the time. The other 20% were ties brought on by his spectacular talent for injuring himself mid-play. Our rivalry burned every August until one September I found myself missing him. Just as quickly as I decided we would be rivals, I decided we would be friends. I sent him a text. In the rigid politeness of an honor student, he replied. I kept sending him things. He kept responding until we were texting every day. I'd never really been friends with a boy before. It was new territory for me, mostly because we only shared the best of ourselves, achievements and prides that I would hide from the world, that with anyone else would have sounded like bragging or brazen, made sense with a former rival. Former in a loose sense. Every time we talked about the summer, I reminded him that I would kick his ass on the playing field. He told me that I was entitled to my incorrect opinion.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's hear at least 2 more. If anybody else would read. Feeling brave. Oh, you'll read, Amy? Thank you.
Okay. She came to me for help after I was tasked with rejecting her offering. I was older, more experienced, the teacher to her student, and I felt ease then with being wise. It was a world where women passed on knowledge like seeds floating from dandelions, freely giving authoritative advice that grew into weeds. And so it was a disruption to that pattern that we evolved into something unexpected. As she stood witness to my unraveling, she did not try to fix me. She jumped to no judgments. She gave no platitudes. Had I taught her nothing? Somehow she detoured away from the path of superiority. After all, weakness is the smell of blood to sharks. That's what we were used to. Instead, she said, it's your vulnerability that models more than any answers you ever had. It was the uncertainty that freed us. It gave me room to see myself outside of pleasing, no longer having it all, and no longer a fear of losing it.
finding out I had no answers and was happier without them. And she wasn't threatened. She cheered and said, I love you for all the ways you stepped into the wilderness unafraid, and it shows me I can too.
Thank you. I am finding these so inspiring. I would love to hear some more. Is there somebody else? It feels, I have to just say, it does feel good to read. You all know this. It feels good to read one's work writ loud. It's the next best thing to publishing. Any other person who feels inspired to share with us? I'm giving you a minute to think about it. Oh, Krista, thank you.
I'll read. Sure. An embarrassing story of my own. Okay. I made Mrs. Teeth cry. I'm still horrified about it all these years later. But back then, I was a high school student. I didn't want to take her class, and a week after class began, the dean of students sent me a note saying I was half a class short of what I needed to take, not for graduation, but for the year, and there was nothing else that fit my schedule. So it was that I enrolled in Mrs. Teef's Russian history class the second semester of my senior year of high school. Now, I wasn't against taking Russian history. I hated all history classes equally. Plus, I was all set to have a nice, lazy senior spring and roll into graduation with a study hall laden schedule. Also, it was a small school. No one didn't know that Russian history was like her thing, and she was all amped up about it. Oh boy, that woman loved Russian history. So I showed up, the quiet kid with new glasses that I didn't wear much because I thought I looked stupid in them. So I couldn't see the board, and I sat there like a lump, just hoping the time would pass quickly, which it didn't. Then she called on me to answer some question about the reading, which I clearly didn't have the answer to. The bookstore was out of the books, I explained. So what did you do about that, she asked, and I shrugged just a little and said nothing. She told the class to do something and called me into the hallway. Right in the middle of class like that, off we went, the two of us. Now, in my memory of the scene, I was about 6 inches tall and she was a monster in little red reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. So she had to crouch down to hiss at me, "You're making a mockery of my class." And to my horror, she was crying, real tears rolling right down those foundation caked cheeks. I mumbled something about being sorry and promised to get the books. From that point on, I tried to lay low. The months dragged on. We had to write a term paper for this class, and I wrote this monstrosity on Soviet propaganda art. It was all kinds of blathering on about stark colors and industrial shapes and such. The research took forever. This was the days before the internet, so I had to take the bus in and out of downtown Baltimore to the big Enoch Pratt library to find sources, but I slogged it out, sitting on my dorm room floor, typing up pages, sorting out footnotes, building an extensive works cited out of the piles of books stacked into pillars around the floor. I worked really hard. I don't know why. I liked it. It seemed to take on a life of its own after a while. But when I turned it into this woman who already hated me, I don't know what I thought would happen. I tried to expel the whole thing from my mind. But just before graduation day, I got the paper back, and in red ink, in this distinctive handwriting with rising loops and flat bottoms, she had written one short comment: "You write well. That is a true gift." She changed my life. I never forgot that act of generosity, and I never will.
Thank you. Oh my, I'm so enjoying hearing these. Is there one last person who would care to read before we discuss them? So, oh, will you read? Lola, did you raise your hand? Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, I did. Okay. I've never seen Paul Herbert. He lives across a wide, vast, watery body filled with waves and way, way off. He followed breadcrumbs to find me, the last rickety bridge being my former husband, who forwarded Paul on to me, his email from England, that is, about my old lover in the 70s in Nashville, who had taken me and part of my life into places I hadn't known existed to go to. Paul was telling me that before dying of cancer, my old flame had written a memoir and that I was, quote, all over it. I had only known Joe 4 years. How could I be all over his life? How slight a chance that I would actually have a chance to see into this particular life. An incredible act of grace finally giving me the opening to try to understand how his life had impacted my own. A gift, the potential for liberation, to reclaim the passion I had left at his feet, thereby thinking that it was his passion, not mine, that I had lost. Was I willing to admit I had been that careless, that I had made him into something he both was and wasn't? That my heart preferred to worship him rather than God, because where your treasure has been lost and not yet recovered, there is your heart.
Mm. Thank you. So, I'd love to hear, I have thoughts hearing these, and I'm just wondering if you do too, about these moments of being seen by another person that tells you about yourself. I found them very inspiring to hear. And I feel like there's some way that they're connected to what we get to when we're in the midst of very good writing, or when we're feeling good about ourselves, when our on-off switch is turned to on. One of the things that was striking me was the whole idea of the teacher who is loved for her vulnerability and uncertainty. I think we go through life, especially those of us who teach, but all of us all the time, we're masks presenting masks to other people. Like we feel like we need to have the answers and that we're liked for having the answers. So I just was so touched by that, to say that the sloppy, erroneous humanity is what's valuable. And I think that, to me, that was one of the things that just touched me. Also, the description of being grounded in the soil and all of the branches overhead, and yet there's a separate piece of sunshine for us. I think, one thing about being seen by another person who sees you, who's the teacher you think doesn't like you, who's very ferocious and yet has tears on her face. What a shocking moment. And then, and then who says this beautiful thing about the students, writing these gifts that are just so separate from the hustle bustle business of life, and the fraudulence, the sense that we need to earn something rather than who we are and just show up. That's good enough. Is there anything else that people wanted to acknowledge in what they heard? Because there was just so much that was rich. I enjoyed hearing all of them.
There's a couple comments in the chat. I see that Lita shared hers, which is very short, but actually charming. She's a famous author who reached out to me via Twitter. I love your activism and your style of writing commands attention. Keep on keeping on. That's great. And then Lee's, oh, that's for me. Okay, that's private. But this is, I think, really incredible to be able to express all of these things through the person that made the difference in us. It gives us the sense that we also need to make the difference for ourselves in a way, to see our own best selves.
Right. And I love that. I think it was Lola who was talking about leaving the passion at somebody else's, at somebody else's feet. There was some beautiful last line about it's really meant for oneself. I forget how you put it, Lola, but there's something so great about remembering these people that are trying to give you this ineffable sense of your own value. It's so hard to carry through in this world, but there's something really important about that. My mother used to give me jewelry. Terrible jewelry, costume jewelry. This was only after she moved to a senior living center, and these vendors would come. So on the way to, she had to go to dinner at 4:45 in the evening, and there were all these vendors that had all these really inexpensive, like $10 necklaces. And my mother would say, "Oh, I bought you another piece of jewelry." And I would wear them all the time because they reminded me of, my mother thinks I'm beautiful. My mother wants to dress me up, and it didn't matter. They felt like totems to me. And it's nice to have totems. Some people in their writing spaces have totems. I used to have certain postcards by Chagall that I had up, or other things. I have a painting that a friend made of a view out the window. And I think these things are very important in terms of endurance. Getting back to that question, I wanted to talk a little bit about endurance and about envy, and then open it up to questions. When I think about endurance, I just finished a novel that off and on took me over 10 years, way over 10 years to write, off and on. And a girlfriend of mine who's also writing a novel for a very long time would say to me, "There's more fun to be had." And I would actually often find that to be true. In the midst of slogging along, there would be more fun to be had. Like it would suddenly, something fun and different would come along. And so that is helpful to remember when you're slogging along and through a manuscript, and you don't know how is this going to end up being a book. Writing a book is so complicated. Writing a novel is so complicated. There's ever so much to learn. And I think, part of the pleasure is just, for me, getting better at it. I spent so long writing this novel, and it's sort of my first novel, which is why it took so long to do. But I feel like part of what enabled me to continue with it all this time was I kept remembering the core experiences at the center of it that I felt I needed to convey. So, I don't know if that's of use to other people, but I think also another thing to remember is that, a number of people said that they lost touch with the joy of writing, and that to them seemed to be a problem. And I would suggest that's not a problem. Writing is work. Any art is work. It's not, there are aspects of it that are fun, but it's more important than fun. So it's okay. None of us likes to write a précis, we have to write a synopsis. That's work. That's horrible. There's so many aspects to the writing life where out of a duty to honor one's own work, you have to do these hard things that don't feel good, and that subject you to, to feelings of insecurity, and I don't know what I'm doing. But one thing that I've learned over the years is that many things in life feel more like military campaigns than they do like yes, no. So you get better and better and better and better at it. A lot of things in life are like that, like building, a website for yourself, getting it all together, putting it up there, just finding who's going to do your website, and writing a manuscript is much the same way. That even learning how long is a chapter, where is the right ending for the thing? How do you figure out what's going to happen at the end of the book? Do you need to know? How much do you need to know? So I just feel like making peace with the fact that you might be doing well, you might be doing everything right, and it is not fun. It's okay. I think I would suggest.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
and then you get back to the fun, and then the fun does overtake you. What were you going to say, Judith? Yeah.
So it is very resonant with me because I remember when I first started writing, the reason I was writing was to discover how to write and what I could do with writing and exploring the writing and how these characters were speaking to me. And I was so focused on the craft and the art and the exploration. And then I had this wonderful thing happen and I got published by a huge publisher with, a big advance and all kinds of crazy stuff. And all of a sudden what happened was it shifted to, oh, I need to get published again. And it doesn't always happen that way. And what I'm working on now for myself is getting back to the part that you're talking about, which is exploring the work. The work is what matters, whether the world cares or not. Loving the work, struggling with the work, wrestling with the work, understanding the work, and not focusing on those external expectations of I've got to get it published and is it good enough to be published and all of that. I don't know. That's just been my journey, and I'm trying to get back to that and remember.
That's so useful because it just seems like one is either looking outside or inside, but it's writing is so hard in itself that one must do it for oneself. I think if that's how I am. I want to talk a little bit about two other. I don't know if people wanted to say anything about on the subject of endurance, of what helps them, if people in this group could, because that was very much a theme of that people were wanting to address today. Oh yeah.
I just want to. Oh, did somebody else talking? I just wanted to say one thing, which is that I'm realizing just in the course of listening to everybody and thinking about all this, is that I think it's also important to let ourselves rest, maybe. I mean, and I don't very much at all. And I think endurance needs some rest. Whether that's like taking a walk or lying down or doing yoga or whatever that is for us. Because we're not these ever ready, or I'm not this ever ready battery bunny, I just can't do it all the time nonstop. So that's kind of just what came to me.
I'm so glad you said that. That's so important. That's so important. Yes, Mally, and then Lee.
I think of endurance as having a longer time frame. There may be points in the work you're doing. Well, there were points in the work I was doing when I walked away from the book for 3 months or so. And I hit a roadblock, nothing was working. And sometimes you just need to come back to it with new eyes. And that can take time. And it's hard, especially if you're working long form, to parse apart what's working and what isn't, and defining the time frame you're working in longer than I need to work every day for a week or 30 days out of 31. So what if it takes an extra 6 months or 9 months? You'll be happy. You may be happier with it. I was happier with mine.
Well, that's great. Thank you. That's so useful. So useful. And then things constellate in your mind a different way. Your unconscious gets to do its work. And then you could see it with more distance too. That's very interesting. Lee, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of my challenges is that I'm best in the morning, but it seems like these days that I get up and the world starts to intrude in my head almost immediately. Like I haven't been able to figure out how to make it the morning job, because if I was working, a day job, I'm in a weird situation right now. I'm in a sabbatical, but I still have work that comes at me. But if I was working a day job, I wouldn't let the other things in. I'd say, I can't think about that. I'm doing this job. And I have to find my way to that place, because what happens is it doesn't take much to intrude to kill the day, you know? And of course, what I really like to do is just to write all the time and not have to do anything else and have someone feed me. I mean, there are writers who have that, right? And people bring them things up to their creative space, and, you know, they can just stay in the trance for as long as they want until they're exhausted. But that's just not life. But yeah, but I do. And you also have to do the other part, that you have to do the submitting. You have to do that part. Although I'm far away from that right now, and thankfully so.
When you say that a small thing can kill the day, what could you give me an example of what you mean by that?
Just checking email, you know? I mean, for me, you know, then it starts this, what else needs to be done? And even though I tell myself there's time for that later in the day, it intrudes in my mind, you know? It's almost like it would be great if like the entirety of everything was shut off for the hours I had to write. So nothing could. It's discipline. I need to self-discipline so that I don't let those kinds of things come in.
Have you ever tried a processing, a program called Freedom? Do people here know about Freedom?
Is it the one where you just type it and it gives you one letter at a time?
No.
Okay.
So I heard about this from the writer, a writer many years ago, and her name will come to me. She wrote Heartburn. What's her name?
Efron.
Right, Nora Ephron.
Oh, okay.
She said the thing that changed her life was this program called Freedom. And yeah, there's
okay, cool.
So the way it works is that you could tell, so it disables the internet. It gives you what Jonathan Franzen has all the time, because apparently he has a workspace with a computer that does not have a connection to the internet. So what I do, I'll say, give me half an hour of freedom or an hour or 2 hours. You might need to build up, because in the beginning, it's kind of upsetting not to be able to interact, you know, to get on the internet, but you can't do it. It's so great. My concentration is immediately much deeper once I put that on.
That's awesome. Thank you.
It could change your life, because I will say it's time for me to work. And I
hopefully in a Nora Ephron kind of way.
Yeah, I'll put on this. So I think it's like $10 or $15 a year, and it's so great. Completely, it completely changed my life. Lola, was there something you were going to say? Because I think you were.
Yeah, I have a comment that's also a question. I have been working on my book for a long time, and I started realizing this thing about struggling with the book and living with the book. And I started realizing, you know, working on this book is changing me, and it's causing me to grow. And then I came across some work by Carl Jung, who definitely thinks that being an artist, or say being a writer, is simultaneous with the individuation or growth of the writer. The work and the writer are like this interactive process. And so the way you and Judith were talking about your work in terms of things like struggle and, you know, having a higher purpose, I would just love to hear any experience you might have that you feel is congruent with what I'm saying.
I love the way you put that, for, you know, for my own self. When I think about essay writing, I'll say two things: one about essay writing, one about novels. For me, writing an essay is if I have a prosthetic arm that can go longer than my own arm can. There are things that I can reach. There are things that I can get at, things I can know that I can't know if I don't write an essay. So like when I sit down to write an essay, very often there'll be some question. I'll have this feeling like, if only, like I'll feel this tingly thing, like I'm about to be able to understand something. I know enough about it, some question that I've been carrying in my life. And if I write an essay, I'll be able to get down everything I know and then get beyond it. And often that happens. And that's when I know that the essay is done. Like I'm writing in order to get beyond what I know. And it changes me. It absolutely changes me, just the way you're saying. And with the novel I'm writing, there was an experience that I had that I could not understand it if I didn't write about it. I think all my writing is that way. It's a way to get distance on it, but then I grow from it. And I just love this concept of yours that the work changes us. I mean, that just seems so important to know. One of the things about writing is that it's iterative. We get to be smarter on the page than we can be in life because we have many, many, many opportunities to go back to it and to see what we couldn't see at any one particular time. But I just think that that's a great vision of what we could get from our work, that it grows us. It's really interesting. Judith, did you want to say anything about that?
Absolutely. What I am learning now and trying to do for myself as a writer is to recognize that I am exploring life and creativity through every work that I do. And in the beginning, I sold this book and I got to write another one that's in the same slots, and it didn't quite work out the way I wanted, so I tried something else, and but I grew from the something else I wrote that was much more commercial than my usual approach, and it still didn't sell. And I'm like, okay, I'm done with worrying about what's going to work for the publisher. And I'm now doing something that's so creative and challenging for me. And I don't know if anyone will ever care if they want to read it. I don't know what's going to happen with it, but I'm back to why I started writing. I wanted to discover this fascinating puzzle that is the work and my brain and how it can communicate ideas. And I'm so much happier creatively. I still have to push my ego down because that's a big problem, but it's much, much healthier than worrying about what the world's going to want from me.
It's very interesting because knowing where you live, I think living in a community of high achieving people makes it more difficult. And it's like this chimera, none of us did this for status. None of us did this, for, the original impulse in the work itself has nothing to do with status. And yet I think we can get very led astray and feel shame if we see other people are getting these rewards and we're not getting these rewards. And it's so important to remember the marketplace rewards certain things that the editors think are hip in the moment. And so there's certain subjects you could just look at what's being reviewed and what's being sold, and it's a certain agenda. And we have to remind ourselves, many of the novels that I love were self-published. Mrs. Dalloway was self-published. The first volume of Proust was self-published. Whitman published himself. I was reading a book called Dictée that is by an Asian American writer, and it was published by her best friend. She and her best friend started a publishing company. So there's a long history of, I'm not advocating that, but I'm just saying that the world of significance and the world of status can be at odds. And I think it's very difficult. I think that does make it very difficult.
I think that ego is the worst thing for art. I think if it's exactly what you say, the minute you start to compare yourself with people who are more on that commercial vein or whatever's going on, and I know for myself, I write intentionally in obscure, weird corners, and I love those obscure, weird corners. And as soon as I try to get out of them, I'm not being true to myself. And now I want to be true to myself. And so, it's hard when you're on the other side of it and you've never published before and you want that so badly, because you don't know the other aspect, the other end of the problem. It's just as difficult as the wishing you could get over that big hump. So stay true to the work. That's what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to shut my ego down.
It really is a spiritual practice, and we have to think, well, we each have this one life. What's actually conducive to happiness? What's really important? When I think about envy, I think of it as a distortion. Envy it orients us toward what we don't have rather than what we do have. When I was first starting out writing I was working on a novel, I lived in Boston, and I would write in the morning, and then I had a job to go to in the afternoon. And every day as I was heading towards the job, I would have to go through the Prudential Center where there was a bookstore. And every single day I would go into that bookstore, find books by young writers and induce envy. I told myself that the reason I was doing it was I needed to know why, what others were doing. It felt like this like craving for information came over me. And it was, only after a therapist pointed out that she said, do you always do that? That I started to see there was something compulsive about it. And I would feel annihilated, numb, sort of throbbing with pain, and then go on my way. And so, I think it's very hard. This is another thing to think about. It's very hard to notice the things that we do that are counterproductive, because in our rational mind, we all think, the American story is before to after, homeless to Harvard, fat to fat to thin. You're supposed to, so we're supposed to want that. So the perverse things that we do that hurt us, that deprive us of our good mojo, are hard to notice, and it's important to look at them. So once I'll just say a few more things because we're closing in on the top of the hour. But I wanted to say, so I had to think about, why I was doing this and what I wanted to do about that. And it took me quite a while to figure out, why would a person do this? Why would a person get rid of their good feeling? Because when I left the house from a morning of writing, I was feeling exultant. I was feeling euphoric. I was feeling fantastic. And then I would ride that escalator up and I would go into the bookstore of envy. And it was kind of like, people do this self-cutting, like, what's this about? Why would anybody do that? And what I finally discovered for me was two things. One was that it restored me to my role in my original family, where I was the little sister who didn't have a big head, who didn't feel terrific. I felt known. When I felt fantastic, I felt unknown and weird and disoriented and unstable. Whereas this thing put my feet back on the ground. I felt known and accepted. I was in my family of origin. I was having the same relationship to these envied people as I did to my big sister, who was very domineering. So that was one aspect, was I felt safe again. And then another aspect was that when I felt so fantastic, I felt unreal. But when I felt diminished, I felt real. I felt known. So there were payoffs in this bizarre thing. Thirdly, I was preventing anybody from attacking me before I attacked myself. So I was saving up my hope for tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be fantastic. Tomorrow is going to feel great. But right now, not so much. So I would say, we only have a few minutes left. I would invite you to think about, are there certain things that you do that take your good feeling away from yourself? I gave a talk once where somebody came up to me and said she is a poet. And when she was done writing poetry, she would always look in the New Yorker and find poems published there. And she would say, you see, this is why you're not published, quite equivalent to what I was doing. What I did was I avoided bookstores for a decade. So that cost me, but I also gained from it because they were not healthy for me. So I avoided them. I also used to subscribe to the New Yorker and I would leave it outside the door because I couldn't bring it in. I made rules for myself. I'd go to the bookstore and get new books and I wouldn't bring them in my apartment. I'd leave them outside until I was ready to look at them. And sometimes I would go back to the library and check them out again. Months could go by. The book did not ever enter my house because I wasn't ready for it. And that's what I needed at the time. It protected me. Later, I became stronger and I became able to read contemporary fiction, starting out by reading it on the Stairmaster and treadmill. And that was great for me because then I wanted to write fiction, and it's very helpful if you're actually reading contemporary fiction rather than just Jane Eyre over again, which is wonderful. But so, just think about that. There was a question I wanted that I just say 1 minute. Somebody had asked about being an older writer. Is there room to start out older? And I wanted to say, my favorite writers are older writers. When I think about who I read, and I don't think I'm unusual. I had Sigrid Nunez, Elena Ferrante, Vivian Gornick, Ishiguro Murakami. These are my favorite writers, and none of them are kids. So I think I think that, and I don't think I'm unusual. People prize the perspective of the older writer. So, I don't know, Judith, we should take any last questions, or you want to make concluding remarks, but I loved meeting you all. This is, and I learned from you.
I would love to hear if there's one or two last questions or anything anyone wants to share, and then I'll have a little advertising at the end, because that's what I'll have to do. But anyone have any last comments or thoughts to share? I can't see everyone. I'm going to put you on gallery view again. So, anyone want to jump in? Personally, I am very moved by everything that Bonnie said and everything that people shared and wrote, and the struggles that we all are experiencing, whichever place we are on the accomplishment conundrum. That's not what it is. And this has actually really helped me to feel better about what I'm trying to do right now, because I've been needing this as well. So I think we all have to remember not to undermine our successes, even if they're just a success of a good paragraph or a good sentence, and that the outside world is not the point. That is what I'm trying to learn every single day. The outside world is not the point. It's the work that's the point. Amy.
Have you ever avoided writing because the thing that you're writing, especially if you're like healing from things and you're writing as a way of kind of, like you talked about, growing yourself, do you ever avoid the writing because getting to that place, that real place, is actually painful and disruptive, and it makes it hard for you to kind of do the other things in your life well, because you're kind of getting drawn into, like, it's more like, is there ever an avoidance because it's just like, I don't have the capacity to go there today, and yet that's the thing that's going to help, like you said, get you to that other side. But I'm just wondering if you had any experience like that, or maybe you're just like, no, I have to do it. But I know that I feel like that's some resistance sometimes, is like, I don't have time to feel those feelings today. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I myself don't happen to have that, but I recognize that what you're saying is what, Freud talks about conflict, inner conflict. And I think that it's a signal of something very, very important. I sometimes have it. I'll wake up and I'll have had a very important dream, and I'll just think, oh, this is too boring to write down. I'm not going to bother writing it down. And I know that resistance is a sign that it's a signal that this is very important. And you're telling yourself, it might be true that it's too much for you to deal with that way or that day, or it might not be true. That might just be the signal that allows you to keep the stasis going, because it's hard to have change. So you don't get to discover the next thing that you would discover, and you don't get to discover maybe your day could endure you going there.
I have to say, and I won't go into the details, but I had a lot to write about my childhood, and I went through therapy for many, many years, and then I finally wrote a very long, never to be published short story that had to do with what happened, and I was more emotionally healed from writing that story than all the years of therapy. And I'm like, why didn't I write this earlier? But maybe I needed the therapy to get there, and I had to be ready. But it was very useful to dig into that through the writing process. I will just do my last things, and I'm going to thank Bonnie at the end really quickly. We have great events coming up. Next month, we are doing Writing Diversely with a Sensitive Touch. I think everybody has heard about sensitivity readers and the challenge of people writing outside of their experience in the modern world. It's a really important conversation, and we are blessed to have Yasmin Ango, who is going to be with us on March 13th. Interestingly, between the time that I booked her for the Writers' Circle and now she's become a best-selling thriller writer. Like she was just waiting for her book to come out, and now she's a bestseller. So I'm actually looking forward to hearing about that journey as well as the issue of sensitivity reading. We also have on April 3rd our annual tea and poetry event, which will be in person for the first time in 2 years. So anyone who's in the New Jersey, suburban New Jersey area, we can come to hear two wonderful poets, J.C. Todd and Jared Harrell. They will be at, where are we holding this? I don't even remember, at Calvary Episcopal Church in Summit, New Jersey. And that event is free, as it is always to celebrate National Poetry Month. There's lots more going on, and if I get the business done on time, Tuesday we will be sending out an email with our spring schedule, and when that shows up, it will be posted on our homepage and on our workshops page, and we have lots coming up. We are going to continue with virtual classes as well as in-person local classes that will be coming back and hopefully staying back, which has been a real challenge for all of us. So that's all my ads, but I want to thank Bonnie so very much for coming to us and sharing her wisdom and her compassion and giving us all so much wonderful food for thought, and for all of you to come and share what you are struggling with. I hope this has been an inspiration and keeps you going, and if there's anything we at the Writer Circle can do to help you with your journey, that's what we're here for. And it's always a pleasure to have wonderful writers with us and helping us all through our struggles and joys.
Yeah, this was fantastic. I learned so much myself. I love the sharing. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday, and I hope to see you soon. Take care.